Hi, Kira and Terry. Yes, I think this was a surprise, I think, to a lot of people, because there was an expectation that perhaps Hamas would start to release dual citizens, but this really is throwing a spanner in the works. The fact that they're now starting to release Israelis, that is psychological warfare now being launched on this country. I want to go straight to Inez Dilaketara. Inez, what are we learning? I know the details are pretty thin on the ground, but what do we know at the moment about these two hostages?
Still waiting for more details there, James, but we understand it is two elderly hostages, Israeli hostages. You know, like you say, this comes as a surprise. It comes on the heels of 2 Americans being released over the weekends. And I think the Israeli government now finds itself in a really tricky position. They have been looking at this ground invasion in Gaza. We've been talking about how that has dragged on, questions as to why they hadn't moved forward yet. And then with those hostages being released over the weekend, questions as to whether maybe that ground invasion was being delayed so that more hostages could be released, with you know, protests being held over the weekend, pressuring the Israeli government to try and do more to secure these people's release. We know the American government has been involved. They've said that they, you know, it's a top priority for them to bring American hostages home, and we know that Americans are among the hostages. So 2 Americans released over the weekend, now 2 Israelis released today. It is going to put a lot of pressure on the Israeli government to continue negotiations. We are going to hear more from these families asking for the Israeli government to probably delay that ground invasion. And so that puts the Israeli government, of course, in a tricky position. We've heard already from Israeli officials, you know, after the release of those 2 American hostages, that this is, you know, a Hamas ploy, a Hamas propaganda here, trying to put pressure on the Israeli government. So a tough situation, I think, for Israeli officials, but certainly some really great news. It's going to give a lot of people hope. And again, over 200 hostages. I think the latest count was 222. With those 2 hostages being released, we're likely now at 220 hostages still being held in Gaza, and the IDF continuing to lay siege to Gaza, trying to pressure Hamas to release those hostages.
And Inez, as you were speaking there, we had some of the photographs up on the screen. Yocheved Lifshitz, 85 years old. Nurit Cooper, 79 years old. It's worth repeating just how old these 2 ladies are. They were released, Hamas says, for humanitarian reasons. And there they are again, Yocheved Lifshitz and Nurit Cooper. But as you say, more than 200 hostages. It could well be that Hamas strings this out, keeps promising to release hostages as a way to stall the ground incursion. We'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, you there in Jerusalem, you've been speaking to people stranded in the West Bank, those who were living in Gaza. They were out of Gaza when this all began. Just tell us a little bit about what you've been hearing.
Yeah, so they're in a very particular situation. These are people from Gaza. Their families are in Gaza, but they happened to be in Israel when the war broke out. So some people were workers. These are Gazans with Israeli work permits. Some people were getting medical treatment. So we spoke to one woman who was at an Israeli hospital near Tel Aviv getting cancer treatment. And so when the war broke out, they had no way of returning home. And so a lot of them were afraid about, you know, what would happen to them should they stay in Israel. And they felt safer heading over to the West Bank, being surrounded by Palestinians. And so we met with some of them in Ramallah, and they talked about, you know, the anxiety, the fear of watching everything happening in Gaza from afar. One woman telling us she would prefer to be under the missiles and be with her daughter rather than having to watch the relentless strikes on Gaza from afar. She feels helpless. She says no matter what happens, she will return to Gaza and rebuild. And they described the fear as well, not just, you know, because of what's happening in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, with the IDF conducting more raids in the West Bank, striking a mosque over the weekend. That was a rare airstrike in the West Bank. The IDF saying they are going after Hamas militants, but we also know at least 90 Palestinians in the West Bank were killed in October. That is the highest monthly total since the UN began keeping records in 2005. And we know over 5,000 Palestinians have been arrested also by Israeli forces since the war began. So these people are concerned about their own safety. And one man telling us nowhere is safe for Palestinians, not Gaza, not the West Bank.
Well, let's focus in just on Gaza for the time being. We've seen that some supplies are starting to flow in, some water, some food, but a big issue around fuel. Tell us what the Israelis, what issue the Israelis have with fuel going into Gaza and what it's needed for when it gets there.
Yeah, so this is, obviously, we've talked about this, but it is because the IDF is laying siege to Gaza. No fuel, no electricity, no water being allowed in, and lots of concerns there, specifically when it comes to fuel, because hospitals are running out of fuels. They are running on generators. That is running out. And so should they not get fuel in time, they're not going to be able to treat the thousands of people that are in dire need of assistance right now. We know, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, that roughly 15,000 Palestinians have been injured as part of these strikes since the war broke out. And so hospitals really in need of additional support, of medical assistance, and of fuel. We are starting to see trucks entering, so roughly 30 trucks entering through the Rafah crossing over the weekend, bringing food and water. They are being delayed, though. There's a big delay. There's typically hundreds of trucks that get through the Rafah crossing every day, only 30 over the weekend, and that's because of inspection. So the Israelis demanding that every truck be thoroughly inspected because they want to make sure that aid is going to civilians, not to the north, not to Hamas, and that it's not, and they want to make sure that it is humanitarian aid, that it's not things like ammunitions or weapons. So very much, some good news that that aid is getting in, but it is nowhere near enough what is needed now for those millions of civilians in the Gaza Strip.
Inez de la Qatar in Jerusalem, thank you. I want to bring in now former senior CIA field operative Darrell Blocker. Darrell, what are the security concerns here when getting hostages to safety? We've seen this good and welcome news that these two Israeli elderly women have now been released. But what's the strategy here? How do you get these people out?
So getting them out shouldn't be that difficult, since the ICRC was the broker between both sides, between Hamas and the Israelis. They are not going to reveal where they got them from or where they were going, which is good for the ICRC maintaining its neutrality in this and being viewed as on both sides as viable players. So at the end of the day, every single person who is a non-combatant should be released already. Hamas trickling them out in ones and twos is a good sign and will hopefully keep things from escalating. But there's absolutely no reason for them to be holding on to young children and elderly people who are unable to even take care of themselves. So hopefully this is a good sign of things to come over the next coming days.
And what will likely be the process now for these two ladies who have now thankfully been released? What do you expect they will have to do, and who do you expect them to have to speak to now that they've got out of Gaza?
And listening to the coverage right before I came on, apparently they're residents of Gaza, which means they're known amongst the Palestinians. They're probably, as they mentioned, going to go back. And I think the perpetrators of 7 October are starting to recognize that amongst the people that they attacked, a lot of them might even feel the same way in terms of a Palestinian home state, in terms of a two-state resolution to this, and they're not the evil military, government that that Hamas has made them out to be. So they're probably finding amongst the captives people that think not in terms of pushing Israel into the sea, of course, but at least coming to some resolution for a two-party state.
Inez de la Qatar and Darrell Blocker there, thank you very much for your time.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.